Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast. I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Thank you for joining us as we uncover how stories are one of the most important aspects of your business. We'll talk about struggles, victories, and how you can utilize strategic storytelling to inspire those around you to action. Enjoy this episode. No one would argue that we have experienced radical change in the last few years, especially when it comes to corporate America shifting and pivoting and doing everything they possibly could do to survive to then thrive. However, one of the things that I found fascinating is I don't think that companies have properly focused on creativity when it comes to their marketing. And it's something that has been really lacking across the board with numerous companies that I've seen in the marketplace. So I'm really excited for the conversation that I'm going to have today with my guest, because today I'm joined by Josh Rudegeair, someone that I consider an absolute genius when it comes to marketing. I've known Josh for several years now, and every time I talk to him, I learn something I've never thought of before regarding marketing. Josh is the senior manager of corporate marketing at Ascension. He's done unbelievable things for the organization, one of which was because of his creativity when it comes to marketing. He positioned the company to have one of the best podcasts in the United States of America. And I am not over dramatizing that. They were number one for quite some time. Right now, they're in the top 15 out of all podcasts. Just to give people an idea on that, there are 3 million podcasts. So to be in the top 15 is absolutely astounding. I am beyond excited, and I appreciate Josh's time. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Every time I talk to you, and I mean this sincerely, every time, and we've had numerous conversations over the years, every time I talk to you, you change the way I think about marketing. That's why I think that this is going to be awesome to dive into the concept of marketing, why marketing is so important and powerful when it comes to sharing stories, because it really enables us to share a company's story. And I'm excited for my audience to listen in, because I know they're going to get a lot of value out of it. So just to set the stage and paint the picture for everyone, because everyone thinks in pictures, often business leaders, when they think of marketing, there are different pictures that come up. So I want to hear what your picture is. When you think marketing, what is the number one picture that comes to your mind in regards to marketing?
The number one picture. That's an interesting question. I think that more and more marketing has become two-way. So I think right now, the way that I look at marketing is almost like some sort of two-way radio. I don't know if that's the best image, but in the past, I think marketing was very much about broadcasting like a megaphone, and one person would kind of shout, and you would just hope that they were going to do what you said. And now I think marketing has become more and more two-way, more and more like walkie-talkies instead of a megaphone. And I think that that's a pretty big shift, because in the past it was very much like a megaphone. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. And so, all right. So what you're saying, I think, is extremely important for people to recognize, because I still think people have old archaic pictures when it comes to marketing about that megaphone. They think billboards, they think throw enough mud up on the wall and see what sticks. They think screaming from the rooftops. Again, very, very us talking at people. But it's changed to be more conversational. And the conversational comes in with social media, with email, with, even video things that you guys have done in the past, where you're doing a video and there's commenting, and you're making sure that you are incorporating different things that your audience is asking into the content marketing. All that's very conversational, based on the radio analogy that you had mentioned. And I still think that there's so many companies that they'll talk about pivoting, they'll talk about changing, they'll talk about innovation, but they're really lacking creativity when it comes to marketing. So when you first came on board to Ascension, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be, they're still thinking about the thing I had mentioned regarding the podcast success that you've had. I want to talk about that, and we can dive into maybe some of the nuances regarding marketing. When you first came on to Ascension, tell us about some of the things you did to position the podcast to hit number one and be in the top 15 for quite some time. What are some of the things that you did to position it? Because the podcast has had so much success for you as an organization, and it's led to so many different things. Can you talk a little bit about the podcast and some of the things that you did to really position it to be where it is?
Yeah, and I think this is actually something that people who listen to your podcast will really appreciate, because what we did to make sure that podcast got to number one was tried to emphasize the true narrative about its popularity, to kind of build this story about how it was becoming popular. And the way to do that was, first, we released a couple episodes of the podcast. It started on January 1st. And the theme of the podcast is, I work for a Christian company, and the theme of the podcast is the Bible in a year. So reading the Bible all the way through, starting January 1st. And so we had developed a reading plan. It was a special reading plan that we were going to use for the podcast. And we were able to get a lot of people to download that reading plan, build an email list of people. And email, just as a quick side note, email is something that a lot of people discount now, because the fun thing is tech, and the fun thing is TikTok and Facebook, and all those ads are definitely really important. But email is something that, if you're using it right, is still one of the most important marketing tools that people have, because you own the list, and you can contact them regularly. And I'll get to that later. But the first thing is build an email list of the most excited people, the people who loved the brand, the people who were really excited for the podcast. And then once we had those people, the way that a lot of the algorithms work on these sites is they measure not just popularity, but velocity. So if you come out with a podcast and it gets a ton of downloads really fast, Apple Podcast is going to think, oh, this podcast is very popular, and it's going to move up the charts. They don't tell you exactly how they make the rankings, but velocity is really important. And this works for Amazon too. If you're selling books, on Amazon, they don't just measure how many units have you moved over the past year, and that's where your position is on the chart. They also measure how fast are you moving them. So if you can get a podcast or a book on Amazon or something like that to a high ranking, to use that social proof, then when you tell if I went to you and I said, would you like to listen to the Bible in a year as a podcast, you might think, well, maybe, that's interesting. But if I said, do you want to listen to the most popular religious podcast in America, you might be a little more interested. And then if I said, do you want to listen to the number one podcast in America on Apple Podcasts, you'd think, sure, there must be something good in that. So if you can use your core audience of people, the people who are the most excited, help them get excited about the podcast. And then when it launches, help them all to do one thing, the same action, get the velocity. Once you've got the velocity, then you can tell everyone else who's maybe not as excited, oh my gosh, look, this podcast is shooting up the charts. And then they check it out. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. And then the story just becomes about how popular the podcast is, which of course makes more people want to check it out. And so that building that narrative of popularity was really the thing. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that works not just for podcasts, but for many, many things. That's worked for books for me, and for virtually everything you want to sell.
All right. So what you just said, there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. And I don't want people to miss the importance of this. So you had mentioned the difference between popularity and velocity. So based on what you're saying, it sounds to me like popularity is more of the marathon and velocity is more of the sprint. So the velocity essentially is the speed of the amount of downloads, the amount of engagement that's going to help with the algorithm. You had mentioned Apple Podcasts. So basically, you may have a podcast. So to anyone listening, they're running a medium-sized company, 50 to, let's say, 250 employees. They have individuals working on marketing. They're trying to do whatever they're going to do, whether it's email lists, whether it's whether it's podcasts, whether it's to sell a book, but let's focus on the podcast. They may have that company, and let's say they launch a podcast and they get 1,000 listeners regularly over each episode. So they're starting to build popularity. So obviously they don't want that to dip. They want to continue to increase that. So you have the 1,000. That's like the marathon. But how do you get to several thousand? How do you get to tens of thousands? It's utilizing different things you have in place to build that velocity. And you had mentioned, you brought it back to the email, that as people were getting interested in this, you basically captured email lists that when you were launching different things, you can blast it out to the list that would increase that velocity. Is that correct? Like there'd be a burst of listenership.
That's right. That burst of listenership is really, really important when you launch something, or listenership or purchases or anything like that. It's really important to get that right off the bat. And that helps you set the narrative from the beginning of popularity.
Now, how does it not have a yo-yo effect where you get a burst and then it radically falls? How are you able to stabilize it? Because I'm guessing as you're starting to build this, yes, there might be spikes. How do you keep it ascending and not descending when it comes to listenership?
Well, I mean, one thing, ideally, the podcast that you're making is high quality enough that people would actually enjoy it if they listen to it. And so, delivering really high value content is going to keep people around. So it's got to be a high quality podcast. But if you have that initial spike, and then if you're able to leverage that to other people who might be interested in the topic, but maybe wouldn't have checked it out if it didn't have that social proof, you should be able to get enough people on board, get enough adoption that if the content is good, it should keep people around. There's a saying that good marketing makes a bad product fail faster, which is that
that's awesome.
If you're really good at getting people to adopt it, and it's a bad product, then it's going to absolutely, as you said, crash and burn and
sure,
not be pretty. But hopefully you're making a good product.
Sure. Now, there are people listening to this thinking, I have no intention of starting a podcast. What does this have to do with my business? But I really want people to focus in on the difference between that popularity and velocity. And this, I didn't understand this, Josh, until you just mentioned this to me. I guess subconsciously, maybe I was doing this, but this concept has actually been invaluable to me from a business perspective based on my marketing channels. And here's why. You had talked about velocity helping within algorithms and boosting different messages. So one of the things that I've done, and I brought in a significant amount of business through utilizing LinkedIn as my social media channel of choice. And I'm very cognizant of how the algorithm works and the importance of dropping stories with very specific timing to have that velocity. Because I'm sure a lot of people listening recognize if you get a ton of engagement on a social media post, you have thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, even millions of people watching it. I've had numerous viral posts where I will post something and 1 million people see it. And I'm not spending $1 on advertising dollars on LinkedIn. Now, the importance of that is me understanding if I drop this story at this time, I'm going to be able to book out different aspects of my business come X, Y, and Z month. So I planned it out in that way regarding popularity and velocity. So the popularity to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but the popularity to me is continuing to build a followership, a large followership on my social media. That's the popularity aspect. But the velocity is dropping different stories that I know are going to resonate with my audience, and it's going to spike me in the algorithm. Ton of eyeballs are going to be on the different things that I'm putting out, and I'm going to be able to land business because of that. Is that a comparison when we're talking popularity versus velocity?
Yeah, I use the terms volume and velocity. So volume would be like the total number, and velocity would be the speed. So for instance, I've been able to get books on Amazon on the bestseller charts above Harry Potter books. Now, does that mean that my book was actually selling more than Harry Potter, over the course of a month? Absolutely not. But it shows that if you have a significant volume of sales, but really quick velocity, you can, as you said, you can use those algorithms to your advantage. But volume is the total number and velocity is the speed at which you're operating. So your volume on LinkedIn might be growing the amount of followers that you have, and your velocity is how fast your posts are seen or absorbed by people. I think that would be a fair comparison.
Interesting. So you had mentioned Amazon. So you've had books on Amazon that you've positioned, and then you mentioned that there was a time that they sold more than sold more than Harry Potter in a given week, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Now, from a marketing perspective, that author can legitimately say that they were an Amazon bestseller, correct?
Oh, definitely.
And then how does that spike in the algorithm? I'm guessing it's going to lead to significant more purchases of book sales within that given week, because it's going to show up as a related book when people are searching other books, right?
It'll definitely help that way. Yeah. And something that I guess we're kind of dancing around, but this is at the core of it, is that it's really helpful to find some sort of third-party ranking that your customers recognize. So if you say an Amazon bestseller, people know what Amazon is. They know that lots of things get sold on there. And if you're a bestseller on Amazon, that means a lot to them. And they can say, oh, okay, if you're in the top 1,000 books on Amazon, that's very popular. And the same thing with Apple Podcasts. If you say you're number one on Apple Podcasts, that means a lot to people, because they, even if they're not super podcast knowledgeable, at least they understand this is a fairly big objective system. And so that's really what's important, is getting that social proof on those sites that everybody recognizes.
Sure. That's a really good point. It's a really good point, because I feel like people are concerned about, I think sometimes people are concerned about embellishing, but it's truthful, right? If you're on Amazon and you're a top seller on Amazon, whether it's a week or a month, you were a top seller on Amazon. You're not saying indefinitely. You're not saying you had the best book sales on Amazon of all time. You were on the list for a certain period of time, and now you can use that as a way to build social proof. And the same is true with podcasts. And it's very true with podcasts. I mean, Apple Podcasts is a very, very recognizable podcast platform. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I do want to dive into the email list, though, because I don't want people to overlook this. I feel like there's been a major drop with the enthusiasm in the marketplace regarding emails. Maybe because it's just not as sexy as like social media. And now I see companies now pivoting to TikTok. And so let's talk about TikTok for a second, and then we'll go back to email, because I do have a beef with TikTok. Here's my I have a few beefs with TikTok. One of them is I am concerned about security issues regarding TikTok for numerous reasons. I don't have to dive too deep into that. The thing that I'm fascinated by is a lot of companies don't have a TikTok strategy. And it's been interesting to me to see grown men and women do ridiculous dances to try to get engagement, and their customers aren't even on TikTok yet. And there's like no strategy, and they get sucked up into this frenzy of I have to do something on TikTok. I don't even have a TikTok account. So we could talk about why, we don't necessarily need to talk about why, but it's because it's not part of my strategy. Now, I would encourage companies, anyone listening to this, if it is part of your marketing strategy, awesome. If you actually have a legitimate plan on how there is going to be an ROI with it, then by all means, keep shaking your booty on TikTok if it's bringing in money. But I just feel like they catered all these different things, that there's a little bit of buzz. I remember a Snapchat a couple of years ago. Everyone's talking about Snapchat. They were investing heavily. I don't think I even heard about Snapchat in the last year, about the importance of marketing on that platform. So platforms come and go, but I feel like email has been a safe play for decades when it comes to marketing. So I don't want people to overlook that. So let's talk about marketing. You mentioned this to me probably about a year ago, and we were talking, you had said the importance of building an email list can lead to higher ticket items far superior than to just social media. So can you talk a little bit about that? Talk about the importance of building an email list, why it really helps with the velocity on when you're dropping something, people are going to grab a hold of it, and then the importance of selling high ticket items on email.
Definitely. So one of the important things about an email list is that you more or less own that list. So you are completely at the mercy of the whims of the different algorithms of the different channels. If you are relying on some digital marketing strategy on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, and of course, all of those channels, if you have a strategy for them, they are important. And just to back up what you were saying earlier, our company, for instance, does exceptionally well making content on YouTube and Facebook and other platforms that reward long form content, and doesn't do as well on a platform like Twitter that doesn't. And that's okay. You don't need every one of these channels is sort of their own ecosystem. They have their own culture. And if it's not where your brand naturally can find its footing, then I would reinforce the success that you have on the other channels first before worrying about making a strategy for every single one. But for email, you own it. You're not at the mercy of an algorithm, more or less. And you can communicate directly with people. I think that one of the biggest shifts that's happened in marketing, and this sounds maybe very trite to say, very obvious, but in the past, even the recent past, even 20 years ago, to communicate with people, you often had to go through some kind of intermediary that would actually do the speaking to them. Like it was, if either your brand was just shouting from a billboard or it was more maybe sales focused. But now everyone's carrying a device in their pocket that you can communicate directly to them with, and that they can communicate directly to you with. And email is still a primary way to do that. And a lot of this isn't going to work for every brand, but we've seen success emailing people every day. And I know that sounds crazy, and that's not what a lot of blogs say to do. And if you go look at marketing best practices, they're all going to say you should only be emailing once a week, and you should be emailing just content, and don't you dare ask for the sale because people will find that so offensive. And I just don't believe that's true. I think that if you have something that your customers are excited about and interested in, then you can communicate with them every day. And that sounds shocking to people, and it's not something for every brand, definitely not, but it's something that we've been able to do. And I think that it's important with emails that you have a clear call to action. If you want them to buy something, you can't put something in an email and just hope that, 2 months from now, they'll figure out how to buy our products because we've been sending them nice videos for the past, few months, once a week. Think about how many emails you get. I mean, you absolutely, it will be easy for you to miss an email. And one of the things that builds brand affinity, which is not just brand awareness, that's, people know about your brand, but brand affinity is when people really, really love your brand and they advocate for it. They're almost like mini salespeople for your brand, that brand affinity. The thing that builds it's more than brand loyalty. It's people advocating for you. That's built through regular interaction with your brand. And if you're only emailing them once a week and very, very light touch, then you're not really building a relationship with them, I don't think. And you have to find what works for your brand. Of course, it depends on your customers and you have to test it a lot, but sorry, I talked a lot, but that's what I think about emails in a nutshell.
No, I appreciate it. So let's talk about two different things. Let's talk about brand affinity and then the value piece.
Okay.
So first, let's talk about the brand affinity. I think a lot of that comes back to culture. You're creating a culture, a following, a tribe, if you will, of people surrounding your brand. One of the examples, just because I'm fascinated by it, and this isn't going to be relevant to everyone listening to this podcast unless you are in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, this area. But Wawa is a convenience store in our area that has a massive following. And there are people listening to this that you're not in this area, so you don't realize the power of the brand of Wawa. It's so incredible that I was talking to someone just yesterday that moved from the Philadelphia area down to South Carolina, and I was asking him how it was going, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "It's awesome, but unfortunately we don't have Wawas down here." This guy just moved his family, and he's talking about he's sad that he doesn't have a Wawa convenience store in his area. They've built such a brand, such a culture around themselves that it's missed. So it goes back to, they already have a ton of brand awareness. They keep the brand awareness up because of what they're doing. And it really goes back to building a tribe of people around us. And I think it ties very nicely into the value piece. So there are people listening to you, Josh, and they sound shocked based on you saying sending an email out every day. My recommendation would be that they're very value rich, right? These are not quick, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these are not quick buy X, Y, and Z. You're offering value to people, correct?
Yeah, definitely. And it has to be something that these people are actually interested in and see the value in. As you said, like, I think that if I ended up on Wawa's email list, and I love Wawa myself, but if they emailed me every single day with just a button that said, click here to order online, eventually it wouldn't take me very long to unsubscribe. So again, this isn't universal advice, but it's something that I think has worked for us. And it's important that people don't totally discount the idea of sending value-rich emails every day to build that relationship. And definitely, just as a side note, to make sure that there is incorporation of that two-way piece. So you had mentioned, how do you keep a podcast popular or something like that, like a book, beyond just that initial spike? Well, one of the ways is to get customer reviews and incorporate them, and to ask people to if they're very passionate about you, they'll create user-generated content. They'll film themselves using the product or talking about how much they enjoy it, and send that in. And all of these things are invaluable to make the case that not only is your product exceptional, but also to build your relationship with your best customers, your biggest fans. If they really like your brand, they're going to love the chance to interact with you and be a part of your marketing, frankly.
Would you say that your emails, let's say the majority of them, would you say they fall under content marketing, where you're offering valuable content?
Well, we are a media company, so we publish books and we produce podcasts and videos and articles. And so we usually have a sales call to action, so asking people to buy something in most of our emails, and actually in every single email pretty much. And I don't think that there's a problem asking customers to buy in an email, even if it's an email that has content in it. But because we're selling things that are content related, like, it is books, it's books. And these are people who are interested in this kind of book. So sure, it is relevant to them. It is something that they might like. If you signed up for a video game company's platform, email list, for instance, and they were sending you an email every day about an awesome new video game that they're releasing, maybe you're not going to buy it every email, but at least you like keeping up with it. Whereas if you're a company that, sells iron ore wholesale, probably don't need to send an email every day about that. So it depends on the brand. But no, I would say actually they're not soft pitch content emails that are just gently, giving people a video to watch. We're asking for a sale in pretty much every email, and people respond to it.
Interesting. All right. So let me use this example just to make sure that I'm on the same page with what you're saying. I have 3 children. I'm very interested in being the best father I could possibly be, the best parent I could be. So if I'm on your email list, that you're sending me books regarding parenting. It's going to be very value add to me, because I just mentioned to you, I want to be the best parent I possibly could be. So is that what you mean by
Yes.
like you're saying, okay, so then how would you know deeper that I don't just want to be good at parenting, but I want to be good at a specific thing regarding parenting? So I want to be better at communicating with my children and not yelling at them as much. Is there a way from a data point perspective that you can identify that?
Yeah, if you're using a good email marketing system, it should be fairly straightforward to use some of the back-end tools to identify what people's interests are and ask them, for instance, when they first sign up for your email list, you can send out sort of a get to know you email and ask people what they're interested in and have them indicate that, and then save that preference in their email profile so that they get those sorts of emails predominantly in the future.
So then then let's say that you recognize that really I want to focus on how to be the best communicator to my children. Would you specifically target me on a different email list saying, here's a book on how to be a better communicator with your children? Does it go that deep?
I think it depends on how many offerings your brand has. So I don't think that I would get that deep, because how many books is your company going to write about that? Maybe one or two. And are you just going to email somebody about that every day? Probably not.
Sure.
But if you're a company that has a huge breadth of content that you could make, like Netflix, then yeah, I think Netflix could probably find tons of interesting videos for you. And they try to do that every time you log on.
For sure. All right. So what about a company that, let's say they're a manufacturing company and they have a little bit of an email list, they have a little bit of a social media following, maybe they have a corporate podcast. So they have a few marketing channels. How could they focus on different data points to try to change the way they're marketing to their customers? So their customers, let's say they're really concerned about shortages, and they're concerned about fulfillment, so product fulfillment and different issues on shipping. How would they utilize data points to change their emails to be posting something that would be really content rich that they know that their customers want? What are some of the resources that you've used in the past to really understand data and then extract value points out of it?
Oh, okay. So there's, I think there's kind of some different stuff there. So would you like to know about how I've used data in the past, or would you like to know something about, how a company might communicate if they have shortages with customers?
Well, just like how you've used data in the past. Are there any tools that companies should be mindful of to understand where to find data for them and their company? And then once they find it, what would they do with that data?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So of course, any social media platform that you have is going to have some degree of analytics on your customers. And a lot of times that might be interesting to you, because if you can see certain demographics or certain groups of people who tend to visit your website and not buy something, for instance, or not take an action that you want, but they're visiting your website in a significant number. This is just one example of how you might use data in a general sense. So if you see a lot of people who are, women aged like 25 to 45 that are visiting your website, like a lot, but they're not buying anything, they're not signing up for your email list, that's an opportunity for you, because those people are coming on your website, they're interested in something, but they're not finding it and they're leaving. And I think that would be a way that you could use data to identify an opportunity. And then you would want to find people in that demographic that are already on your email list, and maybe ask them why they signed up, what they were interested in, or maybe just depending on your company, try to think about like what those people might have been interested in when they came, and then try to create something to entice them to stay, to get on your email list, and then present them with things on that email list that they might find valuable. That's just one example of how you would use data. And that's something that I've done quite a lot in the past, is look at who is coming on your site in significant numbers and not being served, and then try to create something for those people.
So in the example that you gave, there's a massive surge of young females going on a website, but for whatever reason, it's not converting to anything. It's not converting to emails. It's obviously not converting to dollars.
Mm-hmm.
You would recommend that companies be mindful of that. Maybe they can put different blog pieces on their site that would be relatable to a younger female demographic. Maybe there's something on their site that takes them from going and bouncing off to going and giving an email, clicking around the site, making themselves more familiar with the company. Is that one of the things that you would recommend?
Definitely. So the example that I would give for our company would be, we saw that scenario where a lot of women who were ages, I think 25 to 45, were coming on our website, and they in large numbers, but they weren't really finding anything. And we're our book publishing company and media company, like I said. So we looked at what sorts of books women in that demographic like to buy using Nielsen data. And a lot of people in that demographic tend to buy children's books. They're predominantly children's book purchasers. And so we created a new sub-brand to publish children's books. And when we released those books and that sub-brand, and of course there was more customer research than just that, but that kind of was the first clue. And once we found out that our customers were interested in that, we made this sub-brand to make children's books. We released it. And now that demographic, the visit rate is still similar, but the conversion rate is way higher, because we were making something that those people were kind of exploring our site looking for. And we never would have known that if we hadn't looked at the data on the demographics of who was visiting our site in large numbers and not actually converting. And then once we found that, we were able to find something that our brand could make that they were interested in. And we saw the commensurate conversion rates.
Interesting. So that's fascinating to me. And obviously everyone listening to this understands, all right, you have different data points, give them what they want, essentially. I mean, that's business 101, right? You're delivering for your customers. But a lot of people overlook that. They're not looking into the data points. But I think a lot of people understand that the value of what you just said. What about winning the talent war? The number one challenge that I hear from business leaders across the country is, how do we win the talent war? So if they have data points of people coming to their website based on the example that you gave, and it's a younger demographic. So let's say, they're a manufacturing company and they figure out there's a lot of millennials and Gen Zs coming to their website. How could they position that to potentially bring in that top talent to win the talent war based on what you just said?
So just to make sure that I understand the term, talent war is referring to the competition over high-performing employees.
Yeah. So like right now, there are so many companies that want to get and then retain top talent, and it's been very, very difficult for them to do this.
That's definitely an interesting thing. And it's something that I'm dealing with now, in a sense, because Ascension does want to attract that top talent. And one thing so in your scenario, you're saying people are interested in the company but not applying, or they are applying?
Correct. No, they're interested in the company, but they're not applying. Because based on what you said, it almost sounds to me like if a company has a corporate social responsibility arm, they could utilize that to appeal to different generations. So like in the example that you gave about blog posts, right? Like maybe you're doing a blog post, or I had said about a blog post, you had said children's books based on that demographic. So if they have a high volume of X generation, whether it's millennials or Gen Zs coming to their website, and this company has a CSR branch where they're giving funds and they're giving time, maybe they're giving PTO time to staff to go and help an organization, they can position that from a marketing perspective back to those generations to show the impact that they're having. And I feel like a lot of companies aren't doing that, but that's one way in my mind. Do you think that you can use data points to do something like that?
I think you can. One of the things that I might say is that I mentioned user-generated content earlier, which is where customers will send you, testimonials, video testimonials. And one of the powerful things about that is that if you're a potential customer and you see a video of someone who looks like you saying how much they love it, then it has more weight to you.
Sure.
And I don't mean someone who looks like you in the sense of like you hire an actor who has this really polished, presentation. I mean, someone who sent in kind of like a somewhat shaky iPhone video and they're just a very enthusiastic customer. And I think that one thing that companies might do is, if they do have people who are working for their company who are millennial or Gen Z, who are happy at the company, it might be good to have them create content saying why they like it and helping the browsers of the website envision themselves there.
Sure.
Because one of the things that might be stopping them is, this is totally theoretical, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, but one of the things that might be stopping people from applying if they're visiting the website in large numbers, but they're not pulling the trigger, is that it might be difficult for them to envision themselves being at the company. And I think tech companies a lot of times do a really good job with this, where, to get a job working somewhere like Google is extremely difficult. But the way that they write their careers pages and the way they help you understand the process, it really feels achievable. It feels like you can imagine yourself there. And I think that being very transparent with people from the very beginning helps them in their own mind sort of convince themselves that they can do it, that they can see themselves walking through the process, that they understand how it's going to work. One of the worst experiences, obviously, is if you apply online somewhere. Sometimes it feels like you throw your resume into a black hole.
Sure.
And what tech companies are often very, very good at is being very transparent about what the application process is going to entail, showing people who look like you, who work at the company, talking about how much they like it, and I guess like respecting the time that people who are applicants put into evaluating a company and applying.
Sure.
And then using very encouraging language to encourage people to apply, even if they don't totally feel like they are a perfect fit. Because sometimes when people write job descriptions, you write what you think the ideal candidate would be, but really maybe there's more latitude there, and you don't want people to disqualify themselves just because they look at that and they say, oh, I don't have 3 years of experience with this specific software. Okay, but
sure,
maybe that's not a limit. So anyway, that's what I would say off the top of my head.
Yeah. So the example that you gave, I actually think is unbelievably valuable. And here's why. So one, I think a lot of people think when they think data, they think high tech. It doesn't necessarily need to be that. I think data points can be extracted in multiple different ways, one of which verbally. And what I mean by that is I was recently working with a company and they told me that during the interview process, the number one question they were asked was, is there room for growth in different positions for me? Can I move up the ladder? How does that work? That was the number one thing that they were talking about. So knowing that, based on what you said, having a video of a millennial saying, hey, I started here as an intern and right now I am a manager. And it took, a year and a half, whatever to do that. I feel fulfilled here. I'm excited about continuing opportunities that I see on the horizon. Something like that is answering a question that they know they're already getting through the interviews. So they have this spike of millennials and Gen Zs coming to their website. They're not getting a lot of people to fill out applications. They know the number one question. I'm not saying this company, but I'm saying people listening or companies listening to this. Then where do you go from there? If it's the number one thing that you're getting asked, how do you capitalize on that? How do you find people in your company that are in these different generations that are saying to you, this is awesome. I have so much flexibility. There's room for growth. There's even more room for growth. It's really capturing that. So I really don't want people to think of data necessarily has to be this high tech. Oh, let me show you these numbers that I found on a website most people don't know about. It could be simply your customers are verbally saying, your applicants are verbally saying something to you. So I think that's really important. So Josh, I know you're an extremely busy man. I don't want to take too much of your time. I feel like we talked about a lot today. We had talked about, popularity and velocity. We had talked about the importance of building an email list, and we talked about the importance of extracting value points from data. If anyone listening to this episode wants to connect with you, they want to find out more about what you do, what's the best place that they can go to find that?
Yeah, I'm really grateful to have had this time with you, Matt. And if someone is interested, I'd be happy to talk to them on LinkedIn. I guess my LinkedIn link will be in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll include them. So the best place is LinkedIn?
Definitely.
Perfect. I will include that in the show notes. People can just click, they can connect with Josh. Josh, thank you again for your time. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to drop an email to matt@mattzaun.com with the subject line Stories with Traction. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share tons of resources on how you can be a better storyteller. Remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.